So, this is my panel, The Music Theory of Sick Beats. If you love some fat drum beats, you're in the right place. Who loves drum beats? If you love music theory, that's even better. Who loves music theory? And then if you love math, then congrats. You're the only person here who does, but you are super invited to stay. That's sick, yeah. I couldn't. That would never be me. I stopped at high school math, but you know what? Calculus was fun. I don't know how to do it, but it was fun. So this is going to be mostly geared towards composers who are wanting to explore the world of rhythm. You know, we have a lot of language for describing harmony, melody, instrumentation, orchestration, but not a lot when it comes to rhythm. So I wanted to do something to benefit that, and then also, I'm also going to play a lot of fun music. So this is going to be a little something for everyone. Let's get into it. So first things first, wouldn't you want to know how a song like this works? You might know what it is because I just played it earlier, but so that is, in fact, Mad Space from Sonic Adventure 2. That one is really intriguing because it has that weird, kind of funky time signature. It's not exactly 4/4. I'll explain how that works later. Next one up, a song that I always love using as an example. So that one is the Mark's Battle theme from Kirby Superstar. You can't really get a hang of it because it has some really weird shifting beats. And then for my final example, this is a song I love. And that one works because I genuinely have no idea how that song works, actually. But we're going to try to figure it out. Yes.
What they did was they coded it into the game in 4/4, and then they changed the speed.
That is correct. We will stay tuned. This is this is at least an hour long, so we'll see. That being said, all of these are linked because rhythmically, they are very interesting. Rhythmic interest is at the forefront. And so, if they can make interesting songs based on rhythms, what if we focused on that first instead of the melody or the harmony? I'm going to show you how. But before I do any of that, who am I? I know some of you know who I am. I see some familiar faces in the crowd, but I'm still going to introduce myself anyway. So my name is Akil, but you can also call me Cassidini, as I'm known sometimes on the internet. I do a lot of composing. I also am an academic advisor at Indiana University. That's where I am from. I mean, I lived here first, but I live there now. So that's where I'm going to say I'm from. I've got a couple degrees. One, the most important being I have a master in music scoring, which means I am certified to write video game music. Therefore, I'm an expert. Therefore, you can trust me whenever I say anything, even when I'm lying. And then also, I'm on the internet. This is the part where I plug myself and tell you to look me up and stuff. I have a website. It's called Cassidini.com. I got a Bandcamp. More on that later. I have a YouTube. I do chiptune remixes. I regrettably have Twitter still. Ew, boo, Elon Musk, ew, gross. Boo! That being said, I hate making new accounts, and I wanna use Blue Sky so bad, but I'm like, I don't want to start over. It's gonna happen though. I'm gonna delete Twitter soon. And then I have an Instagram. I mostly post food pictures, but sometimes I also post music. If you like both, you should follow me. And then most importantly, I just made a video game. That is the video game. Look at that. And by made, I mean I did the music. I didn't actually do any of the other important parts of a video game. But you can download the soundtrack album for it now. It is on said Bandcamp and said website. You can also stream it if you don't like paying for music, like me. So there it is. You should check it out. It's great. It's fun. Okay. So what we're going to dig into today is how to analyze rhythm, how to create fun rhythms, and then we're going to get real crazy with it. Y'all ready? So first, we're going to have to talk about foundational beats. I would have put in a fun little sonic soundbite here, but I didn't know how to do that, and I made this in like 2 days. So we're just going to start by going over the important elements of rhythm. It's going to be very music theory 1 review, so if it sounds a little boring, trust me, you're going to wish it stayed that boring. So first, the true basics. Again, this is going to sound boring, but it's going to pick up. So first, beats. Who knows what a beat is? No one knows what a beat is. I don't see hands. So a beat is an individual unit of time in a measure, which can be evenly spaced, can be asymmetrical, but generally you have notes, which are beats with sound, and then rests, which are beats with silence. Then you can divide those beats up. So if you've got quarter notes, you could also do eighth notes, 16th notes, faster and faster, but I can't snap that fast. You can also do 3s and 5s or whatever. Time signatures, that's how many of those individual beats you've got in a given unit of time. You've got your tempo, which is then how fast those beats are being played. And then, like I said, units of time, these are measures, which is how much musical information you fit into one solid chunk before it gets repeated or switches to a new idea. So now that we have all of these foundational concepts under our belt, we're going to go back to Mad Space. So who can tell me why this is rhythmically interesting? Just shout it out. 7/8. That is right. It is in 7/8. So time signatures, usually the most common one is like 4/4 or something like 3/4, commonly known as waltz time. And 4/4 is commonly known as common time because it is so common that they called it common. Does common still sound like a real word? It doesn't to me. But 7/8 kind of feels like it's 4/4, but you just snipped it off really quick because you have 7/8 notes instead of 8 of them. So it feels inherently more interesting, inherently more cool, and it can be a little difficult to write music in 7/8 that just feels natural just because it's so uncommon. So next, we've got the intermediate concepts. So if you want to make music that feels good, you're going to want to pay the most attention to this level right here. So first, we've got metric accent and or pulse. So this is one of the most important things that gives time signatures their flavor. Metric accent and pulse are the alternating feelings of strong beats and weak beats. So take, for example, 2/4 or 3/4. So in 2/4, you've got one strong beat and one weak beat. That is basically any pulse with a number of 2. 2/4, 2/8, which isn't real. 2/2, you've got a strong, you've got a weak. It just keeps alternating back and forth. 3/4 is different. It's got one strong and 2 weaks. Makes it more interesting that way. And then you can combine them in any number of ways. 4/4 is a combination of two 2/4s. So one strong, one weak, one really strong, one weak, then one slightly less strong, one more weak. And then you could do 5/4. That is up to your interpretation. A lot of people do 3 + 2. Next, after that, you've got rhythmic tension or anticipation. It's what happens when you accent weak beats. That makes rhythms feel a lot more interesting because if you just played out a standard, if your melody was just hitting every beat of 4/4, it'd be kind of boring, it'd be kind of snooze fest, it'd be kind of lame, like boo, don't like it. But let's say you always started on the 2, or maybe you always picked up by playing on the 4. Now you've got a little bit more drive, it's a bit more interesting, and all you did was play it on a different note. It could be the same exact melody starting in a different place, automatically more interesting. Now, let's say you wanted to do an anticipation, but you didn't want to play the next following strong beat. That's called syncopation, where all of a sudden you have a regular pulse, but then you go like that. It feels even more fun than just regular rhythmic tension, because then it sort of in the same way as harmonic tension, you've got a 5 chord, you're building on it, you really want it to resolve. Syncopation builds up a lot of energy, just begging you to just let it go. And then when you do, it feels awesome. Next is compound meters. This is when a standard time signature, your 4/4, your 2/4, your 3/4, has a different subdivision. Usually it's a power of 2, 2, 4, 8, but oftentimes the most common one is a triplet subdivision where 4/4 will become something like 12/8, or 3/4 is 9/8. And then you have mixed meter. So this is what happens when you change the time signature throughout the piece. So let's say you start in 4/4, but then you move on to 3/4, and then maybe 5/4. Who knows? The world is your oyster. You choose your destiny. Then, not lastly, this is not last, I lied. Nextly, we have looping beats. Probably the reason a lot of you are here, because this is the beats part of Sick Beats. So, I'm gonna basically steal this, musical theories later, but I'm gonna steal this concept from 8-bit music theory. Who loves 8-bit music theory? He's great, but he had this video where he helped codify some language that I'm going to be stealing gleefully, but I'm going to give him credit because I'm a gentleman. So he broke up beats into 3 different categories. First, you have the beat, which identifies the strong beats of your pulse. Then you have the engine, which introduces rhythmic tension, which we talked about earlier, by accenting all of the weak beats, accenting the syncopation. And then you have the constant, which outlines the pulse as a whole and on different subdivision layers. So it could outline in 4/4 all 4 quarter notes just to have a standard beat. You could outline the 16th notes to make it feel very high energy. And that is how you make a beat. If that's all you wanted to know, there you go. There's your answer. You're free to go. But if you want to learn how to do more interesting things, stay tuned. Next, you have clave, or key rhythm, because clave just means key. So one of the most common claves that I'm going to snap out here, this isn't like the clave you're probably thinking of, but it goes like so. So that is a rhythmic pattern, a repeating rhythmic pattern that basically acts as an engine by highlighting all those interesting rhythmic tension beats. So layering that on top of a more regular beat would just then make your beat even more sick, as it were. Then last, we have time feel, which especially when you're producing in the box, that being any sort of digital music, it can help it give it a more humanistic feeling. So you can do something like rubato, which gives you like a bit of expressiveness, a little bit of mastery, makes it feel like someone's really leaning in and feeling the music. You can do swing to make it feel jazzy or whatever, or you could do some other weird out-of-time strangeness. So now that we've talked about all this, we can also go back and listen to the Marx theme. So who knows why this one is interesting? You. That is so right. Oh my God, you're a genius. You should be hosting this panel instead of me. So, the Marx theme shifts time signatures basically every measure. There are some parts where it stays constant for like a tiny little bit, but for the most part, it's just all over the place because it wants you to feel completely disoriented because he's kind of crazy. He's a crazy little guy. I love him though. He's so fun. So, now, actually, lastly, we have the advanced rhythmic concepts. So this is the king of the crop. Now, you're gonna if you throw this into your music, you're gonna get some like little eyebrow raisers. You're gonna get like some stank face. So this is what you want. So polyrhythm. this is what happens. I hear woos. Wow, we really like numbers here. So this is what happens when you divide a measure or a beat in two different ways or more at once. So one of the most famous is 2 against 3, also called a hemiola. So it would be if you got a 2 and then you have a 3. I did that wrong, sorry. Like that. Don't ask me to do more complicated ones. I cannot do a 7/11 polyrhythm. I forgot how to do that a long time ago. So that one is the most common. You've got like the 2 smallest prime numbers. It's easy to identify. It feels good. It's also known as Carol of the Bells. Next, you have polymeter. It is like polyrhythm in the sense that it is actually just polyrhythm, except instead of taking place within a single measure, you spread it out over multiple at once, and they meet back up together after a few measures. And then the last one is metric modulation, kind of like the most complicated of them all, because it's a lot less common, but it involves switching tempos and time signatures in a way that is foreshadowed and feels really good because you're relating a new tempo back to the old tempo. And I'm going to explain more on that later, but first, I think we have enough information to explain how the song works. Yeah, I lied. No, that's not enough. That's not enough. I think we need to go even further. I'm so sorry. It's time to enter math groove zone. So, we're going to talk about math quite a bit, but don't worry. It's not going to get excessively mathy. Not yet. So first, if you want to make some sick beats, this is the way to do it. This is called an additive groove. This is what happens when you split up a meter into some uneven groups. So, like that clave I did earlier, if you count up the beats I did, that's 3 plus 3 plus 2, that's 4/4. You could throw that into 4/4 right now and just have a very interesting 4/4. Bam, instant sick beat. You're welcome. So this is kind of similar to mixed meter because you are, instead of doing a measure of 3/4, a measure of 3/4, a measure of 2/4, it's just, okay, 3/3/2, all within one chunk of 4/4. So it's kind of like an evolution of the concept. Instead of extending and shrinking measures, you're just condensing it down to one little bar of music. And you can also work on the subdivision, or as I like to say, micropulse level, by introducing, like I said, it was in 4/4, but the 3 plus 3 plus 2, that's 8. It's not 8/4, but it's 8/8 because I'm working on eighth notes rather than quarter notes. So basically, if you multiply the time signature, 4/4 times 2 is 8/8, then you get some more notes to work with. Simple math, right? It's simple math. I'm going easy. So, for example, I'm going to play some Plock music. Who knows Plock? So this is the beach theme, and once again, it is in 7. So sorry to cut it off there. If you like the sound, you like it, just play the game. Just listen to the whole soundtrack. Do it. It's great. It's so good. You're so right. So it's like, just like Mad Space, it is in 7. However, instead of it doing like this 4/4 slightly cut off thing, it's intentionally doing a funkier beat. So it's breaking it up into 2, 2, and 3. But that 3, if you listen again, that's not like a regular 3. Because it's still 4 individual beats. It's instead, I forgot to press the button. So it's more of a container because you're splitting the 3 into 2 different sections because you're working at that micropulse level, essentially meaning you're doing a 14/16 idea rather than 7/8. So you could call it 2 plus 2 plus 1.5, 1.5, or you could say it's 4 plus 4 plus 3 plus 3 16th notes. Next, we have divisive grooves. So this one is even more common than a math groove because it's really easy. If you wanted to write like an instant sick beat today, I would recommend you do something like this. So what is it? This is when you split a meter evenly amongst the factors. So, like that time signature I mentioned earlier, 12/8. That is like a compound 4/4, right? Well, forget that. That's unimportant. So treat it more like it's just a number. What are the factors of 12? It's 2, 2, and 3, which means you can do a group of 2, a group of 3, a group of 4, or a group of 6, just playing with those factors. And the way I love to notate this is you have the 4 with the 3 in the parentheses. That means 4 groups of 3, 4 beats that are 3 subdivisions each. That's 12. So the more factors you have, the more fun divisions you can have. So like if you had 35, 42, some gigantic number like that, the bigger you go, the more fun you have. That's the rule. And so to explain this, I have a simple, very simple example. This is Snowman from the Mother series. Specifically, I picked the first one because it's my favorite. But this gives you like a jolly feeling because it's 6/8 played straight as just 2 groups of 3. As you can see by the notation that I just put on the screen. Very fun, very Christmas. So after that, you have algebraic grooves. Don't worry, that's a big scary math word, but it is simple because it's literally just a combination of the last 2 things I talked about. So what it comes in the form of AB plus XY, meaning you have one beat, like let's say 23, which is not, it's a prime number. You can't really divide a prime number by anything except itself in 1. That's simple math. But if we split this up, so this is the additive component, we turn it to 9 and 14. Those have multiple factors. Then, 9, it's got 3 and 3. 14, it's got 2 and 7. So you can split those up into those beats. So you have 3 beats of 3 subdivisions each, and then 7 beats of 2 subdivisions each. I would tap this out, but that's unimportant. I think you get it by now. So it's kind of like mixed meter, but you've got clashing vibes. So you've got like one feeling on one end, a different feeling on the other end. It feels really cool. It feels like you're mastering something. So I think it works really well. The best example I could give was Dragon Roost Island from The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker. So this song, it is, I'm going to talk before I play it, it is in 12/8. And it does do that, kind of playing it straight vibe at first. It has like 2 groups of 3, and then all of a sudden it switches into this funkier, faster rhythm. And instead of just snapping it, I'm going to play it, and you can feel it. So even though it's even, it still feels off kilter because it's constantly switching from one slightly slower pulse to one slightly faster one. And that is still not enough to help me explain Strong One Masked Man. So I'm sorry, but we're going to have to go a little bit off the deep end here. Are you telling me there's no way this was always in common time zone? I think it's time for some truly sick beats. So, this is where the math starts to get intense, and I might lose you. Therefore, you should definitely use the QR code, which was at the beginning. It's now at the end, so sorry, you're going to have to wait for that. But if you don't get it today, sleep on it, because I feel like this will be useful to you. So, metric modulation, again, is when you change meter and tempo by relating both to the other. So like saying the 8th note triplet of one thing is the standard 8th note to the other, something like that. So when you change meters, you kind of have a few different variables to work with. One of them is the time. What's the pulse speed? Are the beats clicking by fast, or are they clicking by a bit slower? And then you have time scale. How long, in seconds, usually you work with milliseconds because these things don't last that long, but how long in seconds is the actual measure of music? The other variable is modulation, aka is it faster, is it slower, or is it staying the same? So we also have some things that we need to clarify. So time signatures aren't real, first of all. What do I mean by that? Well, musical time, this is what you read on a page. 2/4, 9/8, 5/2, things like that. If you're a musician, you know what these are. You should get this by now. However, then there's rational time. Only one of these things is different. Do you notice what's different? 9/12. What's 9/12? I'll tell you what 9/12 is. Rational time is what happens when you convert a time signature from readable music into something that is a mathematical ratio, because every fraction is just a ratio, rational time. That's it. So 2/4 and 5/2 stay the same because they are what they say they are on the 10. You're splitting up a whole measure into quarter notes. You only play 2 of those quarter notes. Split a whole measure up into half notes, and then you have 5 of them. So it's kind of much larger than that measure would be. So their beat values are simple. Compound meters are different. So there is no such thing as 9/8 in mathematical time. Yes, there is, but technically it's different. When you are doing 3 subdivisions instead of the regular 2, you're multiplying the time signature by 3. If you have, because 9/8 is just a fancier 3/4. Yeah. So if you have 3/4 and you're splitting those up into 3 subdivisions, naturally you multiply it by 3. 4 times 3, it's not 8. 4 times 3 is 12. That's 9/12. So that's what rational time is. This is going to help us later. And the last thing is absolute time. This is any time signature where the meter is a whole number and the BPM, the tempo marking, is a unit of length. Kind of like light speed, except not that large or that fast. Think of it, let's call it music speed. I'm calling it absolute time, but think of it as music speed. So this is in 2/2, if it is 120 BPM, that is a measurable amount of seconds. And it is immutable even if you change it to another time signature that equals 1. So 2/2 at 120 BPM is the same as 9/9, is the same as 5/5, is the same as 128, as a million. You're just dividing the same amount of time into a different number of beats. Whereas if you changed 4/4 to 9/8 at 120, or even if you changed it to, if you're using a DAW 12/8, it would feel somewhat different. So, next. This is some necessary math before we go on, because this will be useful towards the end. So, first things first. Here is how you put 2 beats into the same tempo. If you've ever wondered how metric modulations work, congrats. I'm gonna explain everything to you. So, here's the example. Let's say you've got 2/4 and it's at 64 BPM or whatever, and you want to switch to 4/4 at 96 BPM. But those aren't related because they're 2 different tempos. You want to know how they're related. So you should change them both to, let's say the first one, change it to 64 BPM. So the first step, you divide the second tempo by the target tempo. So you want to change it to 64, 96 divided by 64. That is, it's easier to keep this into fractions, 3/2. The next step, you multiply the inverse of that fraction by the time signature of the tempo you want to change. So it's 4/4 times the inverse, which is now 2/3. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 3 is 12. So 4/4 at 96 BPM is 8/12 or 4/6 at 64 BPM. Bam, math. You can put this in any digital audio workstation you want. It will work perfectly. Trust me, I did this for like 5 hours straight for fun. It was great. So the next thing is warping a beat to a new tempo using the absolute time trick that I told you about. So let's say instead you've got 2/4, but what if it's not actually 2/4? What if it feels kind of like 6/8? But as we said, 4 times 3 is not 8. What if I want it to be 6/8 though? So first, you're going to multiply your BPM by the inverted rational time. So if the BPM is 64, you multiply that by the inverse of 2/4, which is then 4/2. So you get 256 divided by 2, which is 128. That's 2/2 at 128. And then you multiply that BPM by whatever time signature you want, and that is your new BPM at that time signature, which would then be 96. Magic. So last thing is getting the tempo of a pulse, which is less important than those first two things. This is the one formula that I use the least often out of all these, but it's helpful if you want to find out what feels faster. What do our brains perceive as being just quicker or slower, in case you like slow. So what's faster, 4/4 at 96 or 2/2 at 128? What's faster? That's a real question. What's faster? Tell me what's faster. It's 4/4, right? Right? If you think it's two. Well, I mean, 128 just sounds faster than 96, doesn't it? Right? Right? Well, if you want to find out the real answer, you just basically multiply your BPM by the amount of pulses. So 496 is 384, but 2 and 128 is 256. I'm so sorry you doubted yourself. 4/4 is in fact faster. So that's just helpful to know, but not entirely useful. I don't use this all the time, but it's still necessary before we go on. So all of this math was featured in the Lake track from Pokemon Diamond and also Pearl and also Platinum and also technically Brilliant Diamond and also Shining Pearl. And I think no other games, I think. So this was inspired also by 8-bit music theory because, again, finding examples of metric modulation is hard. People don't do it that often, especially when you're writing digital music. It's hard to have your grid locked to one tempo and then be like, okay, but I'm going to switch, especially before MIDI. It's a nightmare. Try doing it in Family Tracker. I hate it. So let's calculate this modulation. It starts off, in fact, I'm going to play it first because I like the way it sounds. So catch the vibe shift. So it went from being kind of slow to being in this kind of upbeat 4/4 situation. It's great. Okay, so next, we start off in 6/8 at 64 BPM, and that is the musical time, because again, 6/8 isn't real. Then we convert that to rational time using the math from before that I'm assuming you wrote down or remembered because I am not going to do that live. But that is 2/4 at 64, or 6/12, whichever you choose. Then the meter switch, you go to 8/12, or 4/6. However, that is more time. It's 8/12 notes instead of 6, but you've got a faster pulse because the pulse is every 2/8 notes instead of every 3. So that's how that works. And then just in case, this is every metric modulation for funsies. I wrote them all out. This is every possible metric modulation you can do. So you can have, the most interesting ones are like the last two, but you can do the mixed meter approach, which is that second bullet, which is just making a measure longer or shorter. That's technically a type of metric modulation. You could do half time, double time. That's technically a metric modulation. You're changing the amount of time of music, but slowing the beat down or speeding it up. And then the lake track, that is a complex modulation because you're extending the length of actual time, but you are slowing down, or you're extending the length of time, so you have to cover more distance, which feels a bit slower, but the pulse is faster, so it feels a bit more energetic. You can also do that in reverse and have that feel interesting as well. Anyway, that's metric modulation. That's the most mathy we get. I'm gonna go off of that. Are we okay? Do we survive the math? Are we alive? Okay, good. It gets crazy from here, though. Okay, so next is the idea of guest versus host, aka asymmetrical polymeter. So this, I have to give credit where credit is due, was created by a really brilliant musician, theorist, also YouTuber, Yogev Gabai. He is amazing. Please look him up. All of his videos are great. I watch them for hours on end, and that's how I learned how to do most of this. So this method describes a lot of things, but I'm distilling it down to just a polymeter where one is cut off before it repeats. So if you had 2/4 and 3/4 playing at the same time, the 2/4 would get cut off in favor of the 3/4, something like that. So the host is whatever the main time signature is. It can be in one measure, it can be multiple measures, it is whatever you want it to be. So let's say it's 4/4. It could be one measure of 4/4, it could be 4 measures of 4/4, aka 16/4. Ooh. And then you have the guest, which is literally any other non-equivalent meter, that being any other time signature or the same time signature at a different tempo. Now, the fun thing about asymmetricality is that you have what's called a remainder beat. So that is anything from held notes. You could do anticipations on the upcoming downbeat for the next measure. You could do what's called a record skip, where you pretend like you're going to repeat it again, but then, oops, we have to repeat. Or you can just do silence. And that's really dramatic. And you know who does that silence thing a lot? It is Tigran Hamasyan. Haha, this is actually a panel all about him secretly. So Tigran's music is, if you want sick beats, this is who you study. This is who I studied. That is what inspired the panel, truly. But his music is rhythmically all over the place. You don't have a solid sense of where you are metrically. That being said, most of his music is also in 4/4. How? I'm going to show you. So this song, it is 4/4 across 16 different bars. So that is 256, 16. You have the guest, which is an algebraic riff, if you remember that concept that I just talked about a couple minutes ago. So the guest time signature is 35/16. That is split up into two different pieces. That's 20 and 15. So you get 4 beats that are split up into quintuplets, and then 5 beats which are split up into triplets. I can see some of you mouthing that. Yeah, I feel that. So this repeats 7 times before it gets abruptly cut off by a record skip. Sorry, this isn't a silence one. This is a record skip one, but I like this one the most. So instead of 4 beats of quintuplets, we get 2 beats of quintuplets and then 1 runt 16th note. So the result, it's one of the sickest sounding riffs of all time, but it's really just 4/4. I'm going to play the entire thing out for you. So see if you can feel where it repeats. Also see if you can feel the 4/4. Gotcha. So, if you want a sick beat, that's a sick beat. Tigran's great. Study his music. That'll give you so much material. The last thing I want to talk about is nested grooves. So this is metric shifting polymeter. This is where you get so sick that you might have to take a COVID test before you leave because I don't know, that was just an off-the-cuff joke. That wasn't even good. That was terrible. You should boo me for that. That was bad. So, this is what happens when you shift subdivisions between individual notes. Well, that's one of the ways you can do it. But you can play with perception by having each note feel like it's a measure or having each measure feel like it's a note. You can have different subdivisions for these beats. So like if you're in 4/4, the first beat can pretend that it is its own measure of 7/8 or 16 or whatever it would actually be. Or you can make it 5, or you could keep it as 2. And then you can even shift that between different beats. So the first beat could be 7, the second beat could be split up into 5. You could just keep on doing that and it would feel insane. It would feel amazing. It keeps the listeners on their toes for sure. The next thing is ratio grooves, which are a similar concept. They are essentially just additive grooves. However, you have each number host its own different polymetric or polyrhythmic feeling. So similar to the shifting subdivisions, you have a span of, let's say it's eighth notes. You take 6 eighth notes plus 5 eighth notes plus 3, and that is the 6 you could split up into septuplets. So you get, what is that, quick math, 42 probably. And then the 5 you could split up into triplets, that's 15. So that gives you a lot of wiggle room to work within. And then from there, you have all those notes to work with. You can do whatever you want. And yeah, by shifting all these subdivisions, you can really get a time feel that is extremely difficult to latch onto. If you really want to confuse a listener, this is a good trick. And the last thing is pulse morphing, which is something that I also got a lot from Tigran's music, where you take a clave or key rhythm. So take, for instance, this, where is it? Like 5-3-4-5, which is long, short, shorter, long. You can change the value of those divisions, but keep the overall length of the passage. So let's say instead of those numbers, you go to 3, 2, 1, 3. So you have these, like, so you still have the same pattern. It's still long, short, even shorter, and then back to long. But those beats are going to have to span more time in order to keep the same length of the measure. So it keeps the overall vibe, but it shifts it in a way that I don't really have the words to explain other than it's a sick beat. It's really cool. So now, I think we've finally reached the point where I'm going to explain how this song works. Are you ready? Are you strapped in? Okay, so this is not for the faint of heart. This is a deceptively difficult song to parse. If you think you know how it works, which someone already explained, thank you for that, but also you don't know how it works, I'm going to play it. So if you feel like you have mastered the concepts of this panel and you just wanted to tap out the rhythm yourself and just see if you could guess, you might say something like, I don't know, 29/16, something insane like that. That is incorrect, technically speaking. So while it feels constant rhythmically, it's actually constantly fluctuating. So yes, it is split up into several wild tempo shifts. Those being 3/4 at 126 BPM, then 2/4 at 180 BPM, then 1/4 at 236 BPM, then 1/4 at 126 BPM, then 1/4 at 102 BPM. So it is all of that. It's 8 different notes. It feels like it's a lot more than that. It's very weird. So how do you make sense of this? Because while you could just write it out like that, that's not very musical. If, I was sitting in an orchestra and you handed me a sheet of music that said, okay, switch between these different tempos every single beat, I'd be like, no, I'm not doing that. Thank you, though. So what you can do is treat this as a ratio groove of 4 separate chunks. So if you reduce these down into a single measure, you would have to do the following. The 3/4 and 1/4, they're easy because it's 120 BPM. That can be put into 4/4. So let's just call that 16/16 for now, and that's at the same tempo. That's 126. And then I'm gonna be so for real. This is where it gets messy. But so the 1/4 at 102, using our metric modulation math that I did before, that can be turned into 21/68 in 126. What's the 68th note? Is that quarter note? Almost, but not quite. Quarter note 17 tuplets? Gross. So then there's this last chunk. So that 2/4 and that 1/4, it kind of feels like it's a 3/3/2. Like that. So it's supposed to be like a trestillo. So I tried to combine it, and then if I do that, we get this like extremely weird, large, imprecise time signature. What is this? So this is like really hard to parse because it's intentionally unmusical in its construction. It doesn't really want you to understand it, but I don't care because I spent hours staring at this music and I need to understand how it works. So, using my wizard math, we can approximate the goofy messages as 7.736 over 16 and then 4.941 over 16. And both are impossible because those are ratios that are way too large. However, if we add all of those up and round them up, it does, in fact, give us 29/16. Ha ha ha! So, when you unround it, the total value of this measure is 71907 over 14042, which is insane, or you can represent it as 28.677 over 16, which isn't exact, but it just goes to show you that time feel, which I hinted at way early on, can be relied on to make music that isn't exactly locked to the grid, but it still feels natural. It still feels like this isn't in this weird, impossible time. It feels like it's, and not normal, but it feels like you could almost dance to it, like, like that. But no, if you wanted to put it in like a real tempo, which you can't, it'd be 127.420 BPM, which also is impossible because that's an infinitely repeating decimal that I just shortened because I want to type all those numbers. It's impossible. So as a ratio groove, that makes one chunk of 12 16th notes, and then about 7 16th notes, and then 4 16th notes, and then about 5 16th notes. So using my special notation, that is 3 beats of 4 16th notes, a 3 plus 3 plus 2 additive groove, a regular quarter note that are represented as 2 beats of 2 16th notes, and then 5 16th notes split into triplets, or a 3-2-5 polyrhythm. And then you can go even further. You can layer so many different pieces together. You can layer so many rhythmic layers at the same time. You can switch between beats every few measures. Oh my God, it's so amazing. And then they don't even have to be synced up. You can make them free-flowing out of time. You can make palindromic grooves, things that mirror each other. You can use anything as an instrument. You can do anything you want. Am I making sense? I think this song has done bad things to me. That being said, any questions? Way in the back. That's sick. Okay, so you said 3/8 plus 3/4 plus 3. Okay, I will not be able to repeat that exactly. However, someone said that they DM'd Shogo Sakai and he explained the vibe, which is supposed to be 3/4, I'm gonna get this wrong, plus 3/8 plus 1 and then 1.5. Yes, I got it right. Okay, which is insane. The way I felt it was slightly different, but I mean, you can't argue with the legend himself. Yes. Right. Right. So the follow-up to that was, this was about the first strong one, not the Masked Man version, which uses more extreme tempo changes. I also did rip the first strong one because I was like, this is going to be way easier, and I don't want to do Masked Man. And then something flipped in my brain, and I was like, no, do it. Do Masked Man. So it is the same exact music. There are no actual change notes. It's just the tempo shifts are a bit more extreme, and it feels like it's about a 16th note shorter. Both of them are not in real-time signatures. A lot of people will say strong one is 15/8. It's not 15/8. I wrote it down. It's like 14 point something something 8. So both of them feel like they are. It's more so about that ratio groove idea. You're taking one rhythmic feeling, then you're adding on another one, you're adding on another one after that, and you make that one whole musical idea. Why? Because it's a game with rhythm mechanics and its battle system. It's designed to be unmusical and difficult. So, yes, you green sweatshirt. Because I wanted to use, well, the question was, why don't I use Rite of Spring? The answer is, I wanted to mostly use video game music, because it is like MAGFest. I love Rite of Spring. It is one of my favorite pieces of music. But that is the answer. Yes.
I noticed in the Hamasine example, which is awesome, I gotta look at one, but
Yeah.
I noticed, like, I was actually having a hard time following the polymeters because I'm pretty sure I noticed there was like either a ride cymbal or a hi-hat that seemed to be like emphasizing the main beats of the 4/4 the whole time. Was that true?
Yes, that's 100% intentional, because in a lot of his music, he will put the 4/4 on display somewhere. That one is the one where it's the most obvious, I think, because it's a very loud ride cymbal, just constant. Sometimes it'll cut out for a bit. It'll be a bit more subtle. There are some where, like Vardavar, where it's in 4/4 the whole time, and you never hear the 4/4. But if you count it out, it's in 4/4. So that's one where it's a little bit easier, but I like to focus more on the piano and the kick, which is really emphasizing that 4 of 5 and then the, 5 of 3? But yes, that ride is 4/4, and I did count it out just to be like, there it is. If you were trying to find it, you couldn't. There it is. That's 4/4. And it perfectly syncs up. We've got 2 minutes left. Who's got quick questions? Okay, you first.
Hey, if I'm looking at my DAW, it's a nice 4/4 grid. How do I do something more like what you've done, just to make sure that I'm breaking myself out of this ordinary 4/4-ness, be less common?
Okay, so for starters, I use Reaper. This is what I had to put up the tempo for Masked Man. If I put on the metronome real quick, which I can't see. Oh, this is difficult. So that is currently 29/16 at that weird kind of fake, imprecise tempo. Now, if you extended this out to, I don't know, the length of the universe, it would eventually desync, because floating point precision is hard. Don't ask me, I'm not an engineer. But this is about as close as you can get for the tiny slice of music that I'm presenting. But using all that metric modulation math, if you can get the total length of music you want, like in time, if you split that up into 4/4 even. If you can just get 4/4 at whatever this length of time is, then that's it. I'm gonna wrap it up now. If you have more questions, I will be here-ish, there-ish, but thank you all for coming. There's like a couple more slides. So thank you. You are all now amazing, competent groove masters. Let me move this so that you can actually see the slide. So, now that I have been brought to the edge of rhythmic insanity, I am now giving you the gift to go insane as well. So, here's some last tips. If you want to do these fun grooves, just have like a fun number to work with, take a certain number of measures, then take a certain number of beats, and then multiply it by your subdivision or micropulse size. So like you have 4 measures, you want 3 beats, and you've got, I don't know, quintuplets. I forgot the numbers already, so I'm not doing the math, but that will give you a cool number. So next, if you don't care about measures at all, you just can do a continuous riff. You can just keep adding numbers and just keep going. Just have the numbers define how the song works. And then last, you can use these ideas for rhythms, harmonies, any melodies, whatever you want. They don't just have to be drum beats. And that is it. Thank you again for coming. Once again, I'm on the internet. You can email me. You can go to my website. Once again, I have an album out. This is the QR code to do the slide things. So please hit that up. Thank you all for coming so much. This is incredible. I didn't think this many people would come out to listen to me ramble about math for an hour, but this has been great. Happy MAGFest 2025!